Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
As you join, remember to share video. We want this meeting to approximate being in a room together as best we can. Greg, thanks for sacrificing your battery to do video here at this meeting.
Father's enough now for
Our join rate's still pretty high, so we'll give it a moment. Hopefully everyone has found the notes page. Alexis, I think this is your first time to see one of these. Did you find the link to the notes page already? Awesome. For those of you that haven't met Alexis yet, she's our new RFC series consulting editor. So I think I got this right. So, all right. And I think that we'll go ahead and jump in. So I don't think I see Alice on the call. Jeannie, if you could carry back to the RPC my suggestion that we drop the RPC production blocking issues from the regular agenda for this call. We've effectively been covering those at the what had been the CMT and is now the RPAT, and I think for this call all we need to do is raise a red flag if there's a major issue that's going to be disrupting the production change, but basically discussion of the blocking issues is we're taken care of elsewhere. For FTP, we still have not taken the actions, the final actions that we said we would as published in the RFC about FTP. Roman has a document that he has run by the community and by the IESG that would become the tombstone that we would then configure the FTP server to serve, saying that there are no files here anymore. Go look for them in these following places. That's why takedown is in quote. We'll still be running FTP somewhere, but it will only be serving this one file. From conversations with Roman this week, it's now down to just adding a pointer to the RFC to that file, and we should be able to hand it off to Glenn, unless I hear something on the call today saying otherwise. As soon as Roman hands me that file, I will just ask Glenn to make that change, and then we'll see a new round of people who are irritated about the change of the FTP service or not. It'll be interesting to see who notices. One thing that came up recently discussing Zulip that I want input from the people on this call from When we set up the Zulip trial, we had some people ask that we feed some email lists into it, and we have in our Zulip service plan that we would configure groups as they were set up in Zulip to also include having their email list fed into it. Lynn pointed out that this means effectively that we're creating a second copy of the email archive inside Zulip's database. And this could be problematic for multiple reasons. Space aside, we had worked pretty hard to get down to where we only had one copy of the archive that everything fed off of, so that if we ever needed to modify the archive, we only had to touch it in one place. So I'm going to propose that we send a message to the community saying, hey, we tried this thing, we're not seeing a great deal of discussion of it, a great deal of uptake of it, and it's got these problems. We're planning on removing it, either removing those streams completely or archiving them as the tool will allow us. Give that a couple of weeks and then execute on it. Does anybody have suggestions for doing anything other than that? Okay, I see lots of people shaking their heads no for the 12 squares that I'm seeing on the Medico Hollywood Squares display. But I think we've got more people than that sharing video. Nope, maybe not.
So Robert, I think that's the right thing to do, but it's not clear to me what you will do if the community says, hey, I like it that way.
So is I mean, what else can I do though? You know, what else, how else could we approach it? So if somebody in the community comes back and says, hey, yeah, I like it that way, and we say, but yeah, we've got this terrible problem, so too bad, I think, is...
And so you discuss it with the ISG, and the ISG believes a single copy trumps other concerns, and we told you to remove those messages from the database.
Okay.
I think that's a much better way to start your messages. This is the plan that the ISG has approved, you know, because look how long it took us to turn off FTP because we asked too many questions.
Yeah. So, for what it's worth, I did contact Rich Sauls, who is one of the bigger proponents of feeding the email lists in here, and he understands the issues and has no problem with it being removed. So, I'm not expecting that we'd get any pushback there.
That's really important.
Okay. Thank you for the feedback, and I will adjust the message that we send accordingly.
Send a message to the ISG first and ask us to do it. We haven't already, but we will.
Okay, you're pretty
parallel.
I'm pretty sure I understood what you said. All right, the next thing that I would like to have a quick discussion on, we have a couple of web services that have been running for a very long time at www, providing IDNets and RCDiff. They are wrapped by a technology to glue the Python code to the web server that is ancient. It was an environment that Henrik invented called PYHT. We don't need them anymore. I think that the replacements that we've built at Author Tools, at IDDiff, and the Author Tools serve of IDNets Service Spine is a replacement. We got a comment on list from Paul Kiz about today that it would be nice if IDNets would let you browse a file and run IDNets on it, which is not present, but Kusara, I don't think that would be difficult to add. So I'm also planning on sending a signal to the community that we're just going to start redirecting these things to Author Tools in a couple of weeks. See if it shakes out any other things that people do with those services that Author Tools isn't doing for them already, and then just make that switch. Anybody want to see a change to that plan?
Just a minor add. We had an inquiry about www6 specifically, and I recommend we include that in the announcement as well. If the intention is to turn those off or redirect them, I apologize. We got a request that they be redirected, but I'm not sure where that fits in the plan. That was mentioned earlier. I just thought I'd call that one out to consider.
Yeah, I don't want to really confuse the issue of changing the services with the fact that the services had appeared at www6. And if we're going to, I think we're just going to be taking www6 down. I don't think there's any need to announce that. Right. So, but we can't completely, I mean, we can redirect what had been the old web homepage at www6.ietf.org/ at any time if that's not done already. There are some things that are in the URL tree that are still actively used around ISG minutes and the narrative minutes and other artifacts that keep the telechats going that we need to rehome before we could actually close the entire www6 site down. And we're working on building plans to do those things.
Yeah, I think we're getting slightly off topic now, though. So for the Author Tools stuff, I would prefer if we can redirect soon, because the ID cutoff for 115 is, I think, October 24 or something like that. So well before that would be good, so that if there's any issues, that people have enough time to get their stuff debugged and submitted.
So I was suggesting 2 weeks from today, which would be the 27th. Or, on the order of the 27th, 26th, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any other comments? All right, I realize I didn't call for agenda bashes at the beginning of the call. I think if anybody had any pressing agenda bashes, they would have jumped in. If that's not true, please jump in now. I tried to structure the agenda this time so that things that I expected would have discussion would be at the very top. We've hit the end of those. The rest of these are FYIs. I would like to try and experiment with the call today to not just walk everybody through these, and just stop for a few minutes, and in case people haven't had a chance to read through the different sections, give them an opportunity to do so, and only talk about things that people have questions about.
I have a question about tools. You basically removed the domain name. So what's the plan for the end of it?
Tools.ietf.org is still in DNS. It now exclusively points to a set of redirectors that are run by Glenn. So there's a web server there, but all it does is serve redirects into the places that we indicated on the tools transition plan and that we filled in the details for before. And we plan to leave those up for the foreseeable future.
Okay, and these are permanent redirects, so the search engines will pick them up and stuff. They should be.
But at the moment, they're still temporary redirects. We've been in a period where we wanted to make sure that people were happy with where we were redirecting to before we started poisoning people's cache with bad things. We can switch them over to permanent redirects. We haven't seen. No, that's not true. We did see a couple of fixes, but they were new redirects that needed to be added this last week. So, Glenn, do you have any problems switching the redirects that we already have over to be permanent redirects? And then as we discover any new ones to add, we just add them as temporary redirects for a few weeks and then switch them to permanent? I'm now waiting for Glenn to unmute.
Sorry, can you hear me? That would be fine.
Yeah, so just please do that at your convenience.
Okay, acknowledge.
So Robert, in your little experiment, I'd like to understand the big bib XML issue that's forcing the discussion about moving away from initial last name.
So the small issue that led to the discussion is that at the moment the data tracker has a bug in its production of bibxml in that it provides initials, it provides the initials and the last name as part of the bibxml if you ask for a draft at a particular version. If you ask for the one with no version, it does not provide these things. It is a silly bug. It will be fixed. It's in the queue to provide the last name and initials. But what had been the style guide change and XML change management team, which is the function of which has been taken over recently by the RPC advisory team, PC RPAT or RFC production advisory team is what that stands for. We have repeatedly noted that there are many cultures in the world now where the notion of last name, as we are forcing Latinized last names on names, don't make sense. People have to make something up. The box doesn't fit nicely, and collation is impossible. Unless we insist on the rendering of their last name in a Latinized script. So in the long run, we need to have a community discussion about whether or not this attempt to go mining in a name and trying to figure out what the name parts are makes any sense at all anymore. And I argue that it doesn't, and that we need to move across all of our tooling to a model where we ask our users, whether they're authors or whatever the roles are, just to give us their name in a blob. And we can ask for the UTF name, we can ask for a Latinized name as long as we have the rule for instance, RFC publication that we want a Latinized name. But we just have a blob, and we don't have parts, and we don't even try to mess with parts, and we try really hard to stay out of the game of ordering the names by components. So that's what that comment was all about.
Okay, thank you for explaining it. I don't think that the tools team should drive that discussion. I think we should participate in it. Because of the consequences of whatever direction it goes, but I do think that that we need to have it eventually. And I agree with you.
I agree with Russ. So this sounds like something for the RSWG to maybe have an opinion about, because it's a policy thing for the series, right? So, and it's actually one that we can maybe even make progress on. So this is an excellent first thing or within the first batch of things to do. If you want to send them an email, or somebody from the tools team wants to send them an email, say, hey, we think this should change and here's why, then I expect the chairs to pick it up.
1.
I actually had another question about Jabber. So I understand we're turning off the bridging and all that, and that's great. I got asked whether we are also turning off the server that we're running.
That's what I said in the mail that I sent out, that we would.
Okay. I did not see that. Yes, I expected that we would, and I think we should. Okay, thanks.
So the only, to be clear, the only server that we still have out there is a server that's running multi-user chat. We took down the home server quite some time ago. But yes, we will take down the ability to do anything jabber.ietf.org. We'll maintain the archives as they exist, and as time allows, we'll look forward into retroactively importing the notes from the time during working group meetings back into the meeting materials as artifacts to match what we're planning to do going forward with Zula. But our initial effort, as is captured in here already, we're working with Mutico to capture whatever transpires through the chat client in Mutico, whatever is happening in Zula, as an artifact that gets captured in the data tracker for that meeting. So, and they've got the data for 114, so we will have that for 114 and going forward. Anybody have anything else that they want to discuss?
Yeah, maybe regarding the NomCom thing, is it still linked to the Mitico blue sheet for the participation?
Yes, absolutely. But we have, as you see in here, we need to modify it to also pay attention to a new bit that is being added to the data tracker to capture when the secretariat notes that someone picks up their badge on site.
Yeah, thank you. And how much has been the API for asynchronous submission of draft has been tested or used?
We don't have significant field use of that yet. Martin Thompson is going to be the primary driver for use of that API with his GitHub template repository tooling. He is traveling, so he's told us that he will make the switch to that API as soon as he returns from his travels. It may be another couple of weeks.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Going back to the non-com, so we didn't have the information in the database whether somebody picked up the badge?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's different than what I thought. I thought I was told once that the Secretariat actually sort of, when they do the attendance, they actually take those out that didn't pick up the badge. Okay, so that didn't happen then. Okay, thanks.
And it may happen for attendance counts that they report separately, but the non-com calculations didn't have that information available, but will. So, and we're backcasting it for the hybrid meetings that we've had. I think I want to point, since nobody asked any questions, just to make sure that Russ saw it at the DNS set configuration project. So Paul Waters, Wes Hardiker are working together with me and Glenn to build out a plan for approaching how we are signing our DNS entries differently than we currently are, driven by a need to change the algorithm. But in the process of looking at what we're doing, there's also a very strong bit of feedback to change the mechanics that we're using to increase, if nothing else, the reduce the TTLs and increase the frequency of signing. So
I saw
Okay.
that. I didn't have any questions.
awesome.
I have a slightly related question. I've recently read through the trust chart founding document in some of the RFCs that talk about the trust. And apparently the trust is holding, or supposed to hold ownership of the private keys that are used to sign internet draft signatures. I wonder if any statements been made that the trust is holding the private keys that are like that we're using for DNS or other stuff.
Glenn, Russ, either of you know?
Don't think the trust owns private keys. The trust is the party name in the certificates that are used to sign the internet drafts. Because they're the copyright holder, so we thought that was the best party to name.
Okay, I was surprised by that. But, I was wondering, and then I was wondering who is holding any other credentials. Is it public?
Yeah, well, but Glenn holds the private keys.
Alexis, I remember we had a topic when we had our initial one-on-one that you were hoping we would wing on this call. Do you remember what it was?
Not off the top of my head. I feel like I'm still sitting here going, I have no idea what 90% of what you all are saying means.
That doesn't stop anybody else in the idea from commenting, so it shouldn't stop you.
All right, so the last thing that I want to point out then, I want to ask, are people okay with doing this in the future? Because I would be happy to have this call end in half an hour when it's reasonable for it to end in half an hour, if the tape as read part is fine. One thing that's kind of buried at the bottom that we might want to change is a little bit of a forced discussion on forecasting of what's coming next. There is this section I have down here on waiting for action. We had in the past indicated that we planned to be putting effort into the migration to Mailman 3 this fall. We may start this fall. We have not started yet. This is certainly at this point something that's not going to conclude this year. So from an expectations setting point of view, those of you that are waiting for things that we have lumped in with that transition and are helping manage communications to other bodies about it, we need to start letting folks know that this is really going to be something that's going to be creeping well into next year, I think, at this point.
Robert, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about the part about under upcoming for the data tracker requiring draft submissions to be fully expanded versus containing X includes, and I understand you already spoke with IESG and Sandy about it. From my understanding, is this fully expanding the XI includes different from running the prep tool or the same as running the prep tool?
It's going to be a little bit different. We're not just going to try to use prep tool. I mean, it's very similar to what prep tool does. But we are going to however we implement this, make sure that the authors can work in a format where they've got pronouns, that whatever their mechanism for not fully expanded remains in their hands, that they have the opportunity to look at what the fully expanded output looks like before it goes into the repository. And was a suggestion made when we talked to the ISG to consider capturing both the unexpanded and the expanded format, that I'm still trying to digest to see if it's a reasonable thing to do to help people that might be wanting to pick up and work on a draft later that may not have been the original authors, so that they have the original unexpanded source material, as opposed to trying to build in a path where there was something like unprep to take the fully expanded thing back into something that had pronouns for references. So, Lars, or Eric, did I summarize that completely?
I think it was a good summary. I don't feel very strongly that we need to do this if it's sort of creating issues, and it's also sort of maybe confusing to people when if they have to upload two different XMLs. I kind of, given the trajectory for Markdown for editing, I kind of expect that we would much rather need a expanded XML back to Markdown thing for BIS documents, so that you can do the BIS in Markdown and not an XML.
Yep.
Operational implication. Sorry, go ahead, Lars.
I mean, the Markdown encodes its source in the XML, right? So that should already be there unless it gets stripped out at some point.
If it came in by Markdown. And only Cramdown does this. I don't think Meek's Markdown does this.
Okay, I see the operational implication for the RPC because we want that one without the expansions. So either if there's not two XML files held in the data tracker, then we'll be requesting the unexpanded XML file from the authors if their ID is approved, or requesting that there's a special version of unprep that only does something with the XI includes, but how would it know what to go back to, right? Like unless the URL's in a comment or an attribute, but that's not, I'm not foreseeing how it can go back to URLs.
Fully understand that use case for the RPC, and we will incorporate that this is going to take code, and we will incorporate and make sure that we address that use case when we start in.
Great, thanks.
Unless somebody has anything else to discuss, I think I'll call us done.
Oh, sorry to add another one. You were calling for comments whether we prefer this formula, right, when we read and we ask questions on unknown stuff. I personally prefer to spend 15 minutes more and we go point by point already, because typically we had a little bit more information than the dry text. But if it's only me, I'm all set to do what we did today.
Anybody else waffling on or prefer the old format?
So I think a mixture might be good in the sense that you gave us like basically the entire FYI section and said, does anybody have any questions? I think it would be useful to just basically go item by item, but not you summarizing each item. Just basically ask for questions about item blah, and then move on to the next one, so there's a bit more structure.
Okay, we'll try that next time. One thing that I would like to try to make sure that is getting done, I haven't ever seen, I've asked every time I've sent this agenda out for people to add anything that's missing, and I'm very rarely seen anything added. And I really worry that I've got a blind spot, and I would really appreciate everybody on the call considering whether or not we've got a blind spot, and feel encouraged to add things, even if, you know, the net result at the end is, no, we don't really have anything to talk about here. At least, you know, we've had more than one person think about whether or not we need to talk about it. So, I mean, we still do have time left on the calendar as was advertised today. If you want me to quickly just call out the top level parts of the agenda to see if it evokes any other questions, I can do that. Or if people think that we're good, we can just move on. I think we'll just stop. I'm not hearing an argument for running through it that way today, but we will do it next time so that we see what other comments it evokes. Okay, well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to touch base with everybody on these things, and we'll see you at next month's meeting if we haven't seen you online before.
Thank you for all you do, Robert.
Yeah.